I'm Alex Burton, and this is the Business File. The subject of our program today is managing information. How the effective business manager deals with the massive and often conflicting volumes of information that is generated within the business environment. Now, I suppose actually this is a program about the quality of business decisions. For a businessman or a businesswoman cannot make good decisions unless they have the right information when they need it in a form they can use. There was a time when businesses dealt with information rather informally. It flowed in and out like the tide, and the business person would gather what seemed important and let the rest of it go, sort of like fishing with a net, haphazard at best. But today, as the business world grows more and more complex, information must be precisely managed, the same as any other resource, like personnel or cash must be managed. The key to managing information is to identify the user's needs, then to create a system which gathers and integrates data from many sources to meet those needs. We will examine how businesses design systems in which information flows through the company from the point where it is generated to the point where it influences a manager's decision. How important is it that we effectively manage the information on which our decisions are based? Well, we've prepared a brief documentary that will demonstrate an historic example of managing information.
It was a July morning. The year was 1969. Three men, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Edwin Aldrin, would make passage to the moon. T-5 and counting. Near Launch Pad 39A at Cape Kennedy and at the Houston Manned Space Flight Center in Texas, scientists and technicians made last-minute checks of the systems and mathematics of the voyage. The Apollo command module itself contained more than 2 million parts. Each was monitored with care. Banks of computers analyzed the delicate balance of temperature and pressure in the rocket's fuel systems. 6 million pounds of volatile liquid oxygen, kerosene, and liquid hydrogen. Screens revealed data concerning the physical, even emotional condition of the astronauts, heartbeat, respiration. Meteorologists plugged in data on global weather patterns which might affect the flight of more than 500,000 miles. Physicists again computed the lunar window and the orbital relationships of speed and distance, time and space. Other banks of monitors would contribute massive amounts of other data to the equation that was Apollo 11. Fuel consumption, engine performance, metallurgical stress, the internal environmental condition of spacesuits, guidance system deviation, the condition of onboard computers. Each piece of data was critical to the whole. Each essential to the success of the voyage and the lives of the astronauts. They made their decision to go, and the world would never be quite the same again. That historic flight, that triumph in the field of space and in the field of information management was nearly a generation ago. Since that time, the amount of information that impacts our lives has increased geometrically, not only in the space program, but in the world of business. Never before, not even in the days of Apollo 11, have we been so dependent on data. As we move into what has been called the information age, into an age of accelerating change, there is an increasing hunger for data as a raw material. And the greater the need for data, the more crucial the need to develop systems to gather it, process it, disseminate it to the minds of men and women who must convert the raw material into action. Whatever progress we make on our continuing voyage through time, whether in science or in business, it will be fueled by individual human decisions. And those decisions can be no better than the quality of the information on which they are made. Just as effective information management carried Armstrong and Collins and Aldrin safely to the moon, it provides the vehicle to ensure that business operations will have the information needed to make decisions.
During the next few minutes, we're going to explore the world of information management, this marvelous conduit between raw data and decision-making. First, joining us is Professor Omar Al-Sawi in Los Angeles, and he is with the Center for Futures Research at the School of Business Administration at the University of Southern California. Professor Al-Sawi is an authority on putting information systems into an organization. Professor Al-Sawi, we are really glad to have you with us.
Well, I'm very happy to talk with you, Alex.
Professor, we have just seen a documentary on the need for information management. What's caused this need for business to manage information?
Well, as we all know, there is an ever-increasing need for businesses and organizations to manage information effectively. We're having a knowledge explosion. In 1950, it took 10 years for the amount of knowledge in the world to double. In 1970, it took 5 years. In 1985, it's taking 2 years. The environment is growing more complex, it's more interconnected, and innovation in electronics affects the medical field and vice versa. There is an accelerating tempo. Change is happening faster and faster all the time. Organizations are becoming more internally complex. As consumers, we require a variety of services, and that is increasing all the time. Our demands are increasing. All this is making a focus on information. It's becoming a critical resource. We're getting this information overload problem, where all this information is being thrown at us as businesses and as individuals. And in order not to be overwhelmed by this information as businesses, we need to be able to manage this information effectively, to be able to gather the information we need, to be able to filter it, to be able to store it and use it for our decision-making and our operations. And this is really what Management Information Systems, or MIS, helps us to do.
I suppose this MIS, or Management Information System, is an attempt to control that overload, am I right? What is an MIS system?
Well, broadly defined, a management information systems is a formalized, usually computer-based system, which is able to integrate data from various sources for managers to be able to assist them in making decisions and running the operations of the business.
You mentioned computer-based. How sophisticated does an MIS really have to be? Because my worry here is that the technology might be beyond the reach of the small business.
Well, I don't think sophistication is what we have to worry about. We really have to worry about whether the information system supports the business function, whether it helps the manager to make more effective decisions, whether it helps the manager to run the operations of the company better, whether it helps the manager to be able to perform his job better. The best analogy I can think of is you want to make sure you have the nuts and the bolts before you have the bells and the whistles.
Well, suppose I want to develop an MIS for my company. First nuts and bolts, and then bells and whistles. If I'm going to do the job right, what are some of the factors I need to consider?
Well, the first thing you need to think about is a strategic question. You know, where are my priorities? Where do I need the leverage most? And that gives you a clue as to what information system to develop first. This is where you put your information technology. So you ask yourself the question, you know, what is the most important thing I need to do? And once you've done that, and you've answered that question, then the second question is, how do I do this right? And in terms of an information system, you have to make sure you have good design, you have to make sure you have effective implementation, and you have to make sure you have constant evaluation, because things change, and you have to make sure that things are still going well or try and improve things all the time.
Okay, that's the overall concept, but suppose I've decided on a particular design for my system, or I'm in the process of making that decision. What questions do I need answered?
Is this information feasible from an operational standpoint? Is it going to fit in with the culture of the business? Is it financially feasible? Is it going to cost a lot of money? Or is it going to be affordable? Is it technologically feasible? Do we have the technology, the information technology, the computers, the communications, the networks to be able to do that? And then after that, you start thinking of determining the information requirements. You ask the various users, the various managers, what information they need, what they're going to do with it. And this is a very tricky part because people always ask for everything. And there are ways of getting around that. After you've done that, then you continue with the logical design of the system. You think of the various types of inputs that might be needed, various types of processing, the various types of outputs. And in order to do that, you sometimes have a prototyping stage where you develop a prototype, which is a stripped-down system. And you involve the user very heavily in showing the user what the product looks like at various stages. And this helps you avoid errors very early on.
Professor El-Sawy, all of this happens regardless of whether a computer is used or not. What happens if I choose to use a computer? What other considerations do I have?
Having finished the logical design, you then move on to the physical design. What type of software am I going to need? Can I buy it off the shelf, or do I have to develop it in-house? And of course, if you can buy somebody else's, for God's sake, please do that, because developing software is a bit of a nightmare sometimes, especially for large systems. And then you think of the hardware on which this is going to sit on. And traditionally, there has been somewhat of a focus on hardware, and hardware should actually be the last thing that one looks at.
After you've chosen your software and hardware, is that it, or is there another phase?
After you've finished the physical design, then you move on to testing the system, but we're not done yet. Now we have to implement it, and implement it doesn't mean just plopping it on someone's desk and saying here, use it. There's user support, there's training, there has to be help along all the stages of using the system.
In designing the system, you seem to place a lot of importance on the needs of the person who will use the system. Would you explain that to me?
I think the most important source of information designing the system is the user. The second most important source is the user, and the third most important source is the user. Maybe I'm overstating it here just to make the point, but I think it's impossible to design an effective system without knowing what the user needs are.
I think you made your point, Professor El-Sawy. We have enjoyed it today, and you've given us a lot of information. Thank you for spending your time with us.
Alex, it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Professor El-Sawy has introduced us to the management information system in a broad and theoretical sense. And in a moment, we are going to visit the Sabine Oil Corporation in Dallas and discuss that company's MIS with its director, Roger Leonard. But first, we've prepared, with Roger's help, a brief animated film which describes Sabine Oil's MIS and how information flows from source to ultimate use. Sabine Oil Company, Dallas, Texas. Its annual report is essentially a scorecard kept each year on the quality of its decisions dependent on the quality of the information which flows to decision makers. Here's a portrait of the company's management information system, how information flows through the company. On the input side, we see where raw data is generated, drilling or production reports from the field, internally generated budget data, geological surveys, external sources such as government reports, legislation, competitive activity, industry trends. It's all grist for the mill. All this raw data is gobbled up by the MIS, is interpreted and fed into electronic files. Then it flows into an analysis stage. What is irrelevant is sifted out. What is superfluous is dumped. Appropriate additions or changes are made. The information is then synthesized and organized in such a way that it can flow in a form useful to decision makers at various levels. This might be in the form of computer display, paper reports, verbal reports, or microfilm.
Now the information, timely, correct, relevant, flows to the hands and minds of the decision makers, to engineering, marketing, finance, administration, personnel, and the geology department, who will, together, coordinate the progress of the company. An MIS provides the ability to take data from one source and produce information for 6 separate departments, or an MIS can take data from several sources, analyze and compile it, and produce the information needed by one department.
Now let's meet the person who designed that system, Roger Leonard, Director of MIS for Sabine Oil Corporation. Roger, a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for letting us come by.
Alex, my pleasure. Very nice having you here today.
We know an MIS is only going to work effectively if it's designed to meet specific information needs. What specific needs were you seeking to meet when you designed your system at Sabine?
The informational needs that we were trying to satisfy crosses various boundaries and stretches along a wide array of needs. It basically boils down to one of monitoring the overall company performance. Alex, since we're in the oil business and the main objective of our existence is to drill wells, to punch holes in the ground and watch the money come out, hopefully, the primary purpose of us being in business is of course, to find and produce oil and gas. So everything that this company does is in support of that objective. And of course, the long-range goal that we have here at the company is to run a profit-making enterprise. So our informational needs have evolved along these lines so that we can monitor our wells, monitor our costs and our revenues and so forth and so on. That's really what we're trying to do.
Now that we know about the needs of the overall organization, what about the different levels within the company? Don't their needs vary?
Okay, that's a good question. We'd have to satisfy the needs of accounting clerks clear up to the president and the chairman of the board. The accounting clerks, of course, are interested in very detailed types of information and data. They deal with that on a day-to-day basis. The senior executives only want the bottom line or the summaries, so therein the difference lies. The lower level people deal with more voluminous, more detailed types of information, but it all gets built up and rolled up into these summaries for which the top senior executives in our company can take a look at what's going on.
Well, it seems to me that different departments within an organization would require different kinds of data. For instance, personnel records wouldn't be of much value to a marketing person, isn't that so?
Certainly.
Then, Roger, what are some examples of this at Sabine Corporation?
Our engineering department is concerned primarily with the performance of the various wells that we either drill and operate ourselves or are participants in. So they monitor these things on a daily basis. So that information has to go into the machine so that certain production figures, cost figures get amalgamated and melded so that we can monitor the performance of that well, because hopefully we would not operate a non-productive well for an extended period of time. Accounting, on the other hand, as another example, is concerned, of course, with the summation of all of our revenues and our costs so that we can produce monthly, quarterly, and, of course, annual statements in support of the requirements of the SEC and the governmental agencies and our stockholders, etc. So the accounting folks are primarily financially concerned on the financial front of the things. Our administration department handles things like payroll and the inventory of our furniture and our internal assets and that sort of thing. Marketing, on the other hand, is involved with the sale of our products, that primarily being oil and gas. The information we provide them lets them know, are we receiving the right amount of prices for these products from the various people that we're selling to, and are we moving the products sufficiently down the pipelines and that sort of thing.
I think it's been made very clear there's a wide array of informational needs, and the MIS must fit the need.
Certainly.
Roger, I really enjoyed this. Thanks for letting us come by.
Appreciate it, Alex. My pleasure. Nice to have you here.
I want us to spend some time now on some other elements of an MIS, and for continuity's sake, we're going to explore another oil company. Sun Exploration and Production is a worldwide business, a division of the Sun Company, and we'll talk with Patricia Wallington, Director of Information Systems. Pat directs an organization of 175 people who run the MIS of this Fortune 500 energy company. Pat, we're glad to be here today, and we're looking forward to talking to you about MIS. Thank you for letting us visit.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Alex. Thank you for coming.
When you design an MIS, you have some sources of information out there someplace. Where does the data really come from?
Well, for a company like us, we're an energy company, and so we're in the business of finding and producing oil and gas. And a lot of our transactions that are raw data or original data comes from the field where our operating wells are and where our folks are out exploring to find oil. In addition to that, of course, we also have data that is generated internal to the organization for the administrative or the support kinds of functions that support the rest of the company. I use as an example, obviously, people are what make the company go, and we have to pay those people. So a payroll system and the payroll check is another source of data. We also have data external to the organization that we are able to either purchase or get from someone else's database that enable us to use what is happening in the economy or in the world at large or in other exploration and production companies to support our operation as well. So I'd say three basic sources of data.
Pat, let's say that you've gleaned all the necessary data from these three basic sources. Now that it's collected, how is it integrated? How do you make sure it all comes together and works?
Well, of course, that's the tough part of the job is once you've got the data, how do you turn it into information? And it really is of course, when you get the data, it can be, when you say raw data, it can be pretty raw. So there's a tremendous amount of editing that has to occur just to make the data clean itself. But then there are successive transformations and manipulation of that data to put it into a context that is important to a particular executive or to the executive body at large. That can involve things like understanding the tax implications of some particular financial piece of data or integrating volumes and price in order to get to turn your basic operation into a financial picture for the executives. All of it, of course, oriented towards getting some picture of the bottom line, which is one of our critical success factors.
Knowing that you have to analyze and work with information to get it into a form useful to decision makers, there must be some tools you're working with, Pat. What kind of tools do you have to help you in this process of converting raw data into useful information?
Well, Alex, we have many tools available to us today, and of course many more becoming available to us as the technology moves forward. I break them down into several categories. We have the hardware tools that are available to us. We have, in a company of our size, we have large mainframes that manage most of our transaction processing and hold many of our large databases. We also have mini computers that can support local processing or special applications in a particular area of the company. And then we have microcomputers, commonly known as the PC. And you can see that I have an example of one of those back here. Many of the executives are finding these on their desk today, and they can be used for many things. They can be used as a standalone application to use a spreadsheet, or they can be used to connect to the mainframe or to one of the mini computers and use some data from another system. So they can be very helpful tools. This particular one has a graphics application on it right now, and that's an example of the software tool that is available to us today. Whereas in the past we would have computer listings this tall where you would have to search out the information that you need. Today you can present that very succinctly in graphic form, and so that's a tremendous tool for us today in information systems. There are other kinds of software, obviously, that we can use. Software can be designed and coded internally to your organization, or you can purchase application software from companies who have that as a business. And you may have special applications or special expertise that you require, and you can gain that by purchasing it from another company. We also have communications tools that are extremely important to us. One of the things that makes this personal computer so helpful on an executive's desk is the fact that through communications we can connect it to our mainframe and can have access to the data of the company that is being processed through the large transaction processing systems. So communications are an extremely vital tool for us today. And last but not least are the people that make all of this happen for us. And they're the programmers and the systems analysts and the business people who analyze the information that comes out, and the executives, of course, who make the decisions with the information that they get. So people are a very important part of this equation as well.
Pat, you've provided some excellent information, especially the discussion of the analysis of the information so that it can be used. Thank you for letting us come into Sun today and talking with you.
Thank you, Alex. I enjoyed it very much.
Change is the fundamental reality of our time, and the information is the resource that will enable us to master change. But first, we must master information itself. No longer can information be considered a byproduct for a business. It is a resource as essential as land, labor, or capital. The management information system is the method of harnessing that resource so a business can put it to work in its behalf. Until next time, I'm Alex Burton, and this has been The Business File.
The preceding program is part of a college credit course.